A company is only as good as its people. People are only as good as their actions, and actions are only as good as the thinking behind them. If your team's modus operandi can best be described as fire, aim, ready, perhaps it's time to take a step back and ask two important questions. Are we thinking about what we're doing before we do it? And are the majority of our actions proactive or reactive? The answer to these questions indicate your approach to resource allocation, which in turn determines your strategy and whether you will outperform or underperform your competition in delivering value to customers. Studies have shown that the #1 cause of business failure is poor strategy. Resources are at the core of any strategy, so taking a thoughtful approach to how you and your team are allocating resources, not just at the corporate level, but at the individual level, can provide a window into enhancing your performance. The allocation of resources, and just as important, the reallocation of resources, is directly linked to your financial performance. In fact, research by McKinsey & Company showed companies that regularly assess their allocation of resources and then reallocate resources from underperforming areas to areas with greater performance are worth 40% more after 15 years than those companies that cower in the status quo. The same is true for leaders. CEOs that did not actively reallocate resources in years 1 through 3 of their tenure were significantly more likely to be removed from their job in years 4 to 6 than their counterparts who were more active in reallocating resources. During the past 20 years, facilitating strategic thinking and planning workshops with executive leadership teams, I've identified the following concepts and tools that can be effective in snapping teams out of the strategy status quo. #1, start with I. If you've ever had a love interest end things with, "It's not you, it's me," maybe they were right. It does start with me, even when it comes to resource allocation. It's common for leadership teams to begin their resource allocation and prioritization discussions with a quantitative look at group budgets, IT hours, keep the lights on requirements, and new strategic initiatives. However, it can be more powerful to have leaders begin with a deep dive into their individual resource allocation, time, talent, budget, and the patterns at their level. The areas that senior leaders invest their time sends a bat signal about what's important to their colleagues and direct reports. It's also enlightening and sometimes shocking to see how their time investment is aligned or misaligned with their goals and priorities. If a senior leader is more prone to acting on fire drills than with a disciplined approach to how they allocate their resources, it's likely their entire team will feel that heat and act in kind. I call this leader dominoes, where even the smallest action or reaction by a senior leader tips the first domino, which falls into their direct reports and sparks an oftentimes unnecessary chain reaction. #2, prune to grow. When you were a kid, how often did your mom or dad say, "Hey, stop doing that"? Well, maybe it's time you revisit that parental wisdom. When you allocate or reallocate resources in your business, you're typically either planting, growing, or pruning. Planting involves moving resources to a new area that can produce value. Growing includes using your resources to maximize value to the organization and/or customers. Pruning is the act of removing resources from an activity, initiative, or area with the intent of applying them to a more favorable situation. We tend to spend the majority of our time on resource allocation in the planting and growing phases. However, creating a cadence of discipline to prune resources throughout the year can have a dramatically positive impact on your business. Managers are always making their case for more resources in the form of FTEs, capital, or budget. Not acquiescing to that request may be in everyone's best interest. Laboratory research published in MIT Sloan Management Review demonstrated that when test subjects were provided with fewer instead of more resources, they became more innovative. When we're faced with resource constraints, less time, fewer people, reduced budget, it forces us out of the status quo to search for ways to do things differently. #3, see the system. Are you at the point in your life where you can watch a murder mystery movie with your family and freely admit, "I have no idea what's going on"? My wife can fall asleep 20 minutes in, she usually does, and wake up in the final third and still figure things out. The film Knives Out with Daniel Craig and Chris Evans is a good example. She's able to pick up patterns and make connections that seem to elude me. This ability to identify patterns and make connections is useful in resource allocation as well. A hallmark of a great leader is the ability to expand their view of resource allocation beyond their group and take an enterprise-wide view of where resources should be channeled. The leadership teams that are able to shift resources across business units for the betterment of the organization significantly increase their chances of success versus the leadership teams that guard their resources like one of the 7 kingdoms in Game of Thrones. A key component of the ability to take this bigger picture view is the investment in developing stronger relationships with your colleagues at the senior level to create deeper wells of trust. An effective technique for nurturing these relationships is to ensure that you're meeting with your colleagues in a one-to-one format at least once a quarter to share insights, offer feedback, and discuss potential resource shifts between each other's groups. The process of resource allocation can be thought of as a fire hose. If it's not proactively turned on, nothing comes out and we're stuck in the status quo. If it's reactively turned on and left unattended, it can wildly splay resources in all directions, wasting them and creating a mess. But if it's thoughtfully turned on and actively attended to by all leaders, you can powerfully direct resources to the focal areas and activities that will help you achieve your goals. And maybe then you can shift the culture from fire, aim, ready to ready, aim, fire, hose.